Okay, so I'm going to start right on time and do some introductions while people keep arriving. I am glad that you're here at our virtual table. And a lot of you know me already, but my name is Colleen Lynch, and I am a writer and an activist. And I've been working with ClimateFast for a couple of years now, working on the kitchen table climate conversation process. And we have actually Anne here tonight, and Anne is going to start us off with a land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Colleen. So I, like probably many of you here, are coming to you from Toronto or Takaronto. Takaronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And it continues to be the home of diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. We at ClimateFast acknowledge that Takaronto is on stolen land, and we do so to show solidarity with the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. I'd like to reflect here for a moment on the name Takaronto. Takaronto is a Mohawk place name, a name that the British appropriated in naming this city, just as they appropriated the lands. The word, I have learned, means where there are trees in the water. Like many Indigenous names, it points to the particulars of a landscape or waterway. Although in this case, the waterway to which it refers was north of Toronto, likely near Orillia. But the name was picked up by the French and then the British and moved to name the lake. And from there it was used to name the fort and later the city. This appropriation and reallocation of the name speaks, of course, to the Europeans' casual disregard for Indigenous peoples and places, their arrogance in using Indigenous names as well as names of their own choosing to lay claim to lands and places for themselves without regard for Indigenous peoples or the particulars of the landscape or its living beings. Today, however, I think thinking about these names and their history can provide a way into unsettling these arrogant assumptions and practices. Learning these place names can move those of us who are settlers to think about the people who named these places and their dispossession. Learning these names can help us to see, hear, and think about the connections these names created to landscape, waterways, and other than human beings, and the disruption of those connections. It can also move us to think about the colonial erasure of so many other names and so many other connections. Recognizing these names then can move us to recognize the violence of colonial dispossession in the past, and from that, it can move us to recognize the continuing violence against First Nations people and lands and waterways in our colonial present. And in that spirit, I would like to call our attention this evening to the struggle of the Anishinaabe people in northern Minnesota against the Enbridge pipeline known as Line 3. In some ways, this struggle might seem far away, but the pipeline is being built by a Canadian company with offices right here in Toronto, and it is being financed to a considerable extent by Canadian banks, including RBC, CIBC, and TD Bank. It is also being fiercely resisted by the White Earth Band of Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people who are culturally related to Anishinaabe nations across North America, including the Mississaugas of the New Credit. If completed, Line 3 would destroy the sacred wild rice beds that the Anishinaabe people depend on for their food, culture, and way of life. It would also contribute as much damage to our climate as 50 new coal-fired power plants and endanger more than 800 wetlands and 200 waterways. Indigenous water protectors and allies are right now on the front lines trying to stop this pipeline. So I'll conclude by putting in the chat a couple of links where you can support their efforts to stop this pipeline and protest against the banks that are financing this desecration of Indigenous land. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you for putting a link in the chat. That's really good for us to have. Okay, so when we first started to plan the kitchen table climate conversations, we of course thought of you meeting in person around your tables or in another environment that was conducive to having an informal but a little bit structured conversation. Since COVID happened, we've been working to bring these conversations online. And COVID has also shown us the absolute importance of putting people's health and well-being first. And these conversations about climate justice and empowering people to come together are as important as they ever have been. So just a brief summary of where we've been with these webcasts. This is our fourth and final one. And in our first one, we had some speakers explaining or helping us understand why it is important to have these conversations and some facilitation training. And in the second one on March 15th, a lot of you were there as well. We demoed a complete conversation. And last time on March 29th, we kind of explored how to do this type of thing online, the technical part of it. You can actually find all of these recordings eventually. We've got the first and the third up so far on our YouTube channel if you want to look at them. And tonight, we're actually going to talk about a little more specifically about how to design a conversation, how to tailor it for your particular group. And we're going to also talk about how to motivate that group into action and what kinds of things you could do to offer support after your conversation is done. And so I'm actually going to share the agenda so you have a better idea of what we're looking at for tonight. So we are hoping, I hope you can see that, to have a breakout right after the introductions to talk about mapping your conversation and allow you to have some space to think about what that might look like. Then we're going to have some speakers who are here to share some experiences about talking about the climate and tailoring their conversations. We're going to start the second hour with an overview of potential actions that you could motivate your group to take, and then have a breakout. And in the second breakout, I hope you have an opportunity, if you've got any more remaining questions about your particular ideas, to discuss them. And then we'll close with some inspiration from a few more speakers about how to motivate people and into taking action. And I'm hoping at the end, if you are able to stay, that we'll have the opportunity to take a few more questions if we haven't gotten to them during the presentation. And so just a couple of housekeeping items. And I'm going to share my screen again for 1 minute. I should have kept it on. So yes, you're on mute, and it's nice if you stay on mute just to reduce background noise, unless you're talking, of course. And we do invite you to give reactions by using the reactions button on the bottom. And we invite you to interact and put any questions in chat that you have. And we are going to try to answer them as the evening progresses. And if not, in a follow-up. There are subtitles available. So I'm hoping if they help you, that you can find the closed caption button or the show subtitle button, which is often under your more button on the bottom of your screen. And if you do have any problems, let us know in chat, or you can directly message a tech person, a person with tech in front of their name, and we'll try our best to solve your problems. So with that, we're going to start with the breakouts tonight. And you're going to be assigned to a breakout, and then a facilitator will join you. And if something goes wrong and you're not able to go into the breakout, let us know, and we'll help you out. Let a tech person know. And if you want to stay in the main room, or you are welcome. We also have someone in the main room that will be there for you if you for some reason can't or don't want to go into a breakout. Hey, so I think everyone's coming back to the main room. That's always rather sudden, but welcome back. And we actually have, for the next section, some wonderful speakers I'm very excited to introduce. And I'm just trying to see if everyone's back. Yes, I think everyone is back. So I'm going to start by introducing, I am so excited to have Gabby and Megan here from Fridays for Future. And Gabby Elhab is a 16-year-old student, an artist, and a youth climate activist who has been volunteering as a co-organizer and a co-coordinator with Fridays for Future Toronto since the July of 2020. She is interested in tackling the climate crisis intersectionally and through community care and mobilization. Now, I think, Gab, you wanted to screen share you want to be spotlighted along with Megan at the same time. Right, so I'm going to introduce Megan as well. And Megan is a 15-year-old high school student and climate justice activist who also organizes with Fridays for Future Toronto. And I'm going to welcome them and invite them to start speaking now.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. Well, you've already introduced us, but I'm Megan. I joined here with my friend and fellow organizer, Gab. She uses any pronouns. And thank you so much for inviting us. And today we're going to be talking about holding engaging conversations for a youth audience. Gabby, take it away.
Thank you, Megan. And thank you, everyone. I mean, we're probably going to say this like 5 times in this whole thing, but thank you for having us. It's always so empowering to be on these conversations. So when Megan and I think of holding meaningful conversations for youth, a quote we heard once from a friend and fellow organizer of ours comes to mind. The climate movement doesn't need more successful people. It needs more healers, lovers, thinkers, and storytellers. Megan and I started becoming active in the climate movement with a lot of fear, not only of the crisis itself, but fear of why we have to be tackling the climate crisis when we're so young, and if we're even capable enough to do so, and if us, just 2 people, can really make a difference in this sea of successful people. This kind of fear and self-doubt leads to a lot of youth not to take action in this movement. Not because they don't care, most people fear climate catastrophe, but because of how youth are viewed in this movement. We're cute kids with signs, or we're rowdy kids skipping school. And youth climate organizers who become successful, which can be attending panels, or can be getting opportunities left and right, or speaking on large platforms, that's what I mean by successful, are expected to be completely eloquent, have the knowledge of a 50-year-old climate science made completely out of reach to young people.
Gabby and I are both part of the weekly actions team at Fridays for Future Toronto, and one of our main roles is to create space for youth to learn and talk about the climate crisis. But these fears kept coming up and still continue to come up in how we think about ourselves, the movement, and the spaces we are creating. We felt as though our identities as students, artists, athletes, and young people have been put on the back burner to create these spaces. But over time, we've learned more and more that these strengths of our identities across all youth are what truly drives the change. Those characteristics of open-mindedness, curiosity, anger, and fear are all driving factors of this climate movement. We don't need one person tackling this climate crisis perfectly or successfully to create change. We need a whole lot of people who care enough to fight and imagine a world that puts the planet and people first. And this would include like sharing stories, statistics, creations, and really any thoughts you have. You don't need to be a politician, world-class writer, or scientist to be a climate activist.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Megan said, these characteristics of open-mindedness, curiosity, anger, and fear, sometimes, youth are labeled certain things for being scared and angry when really there are statistics about how incredible it is to really be upset in these movements. So all of these ideas translate into how to hold engaging conversations for youth. We stopped using bigger words and professional personas to talk to youth. Instead, we went back to some big climate questions and anxieties like, why are fossil fuels so bad? Why do I feel so guilty about this crisis? Do I have to be a scientist to care about the climate? Why do I have to do this? Why aren't politicians doing this? All of these thoughts that youth already have. But having other young people to say, hey, I actually have these thoughts too. And then kind of guiding yourselves, which is kind of what this whole panel is about, to what we can do about those. It changes a lot. It's a big step. And when we started having conversations about these scary topics, just talking to youth like youth, and admitting throughout this whole conversation that fear is valid and completely understandable, but it can also be used for a lot of good, more people started to take action in this movement and also be honest about their fear as well.
And overall, the main message we're trying to get across is that there's no right or wrong way to talk about the climate crisis. We just have to talk, and whatever that looks like in whatever space you're in, which is why it's so important that we're all here today. So when holding these conversations, it is also important to know that this crisis is so complex. We can take simple actions to work towards solving climate change, but the way it affects people is not simple. There are youth, unlike Gabby and I, who are directly affected every day by this crisis, who haven't had the privilege to choose activism, but instead they are fighting for their own lives and well-being. They have no choice but to act. For every person, one way or another, this crisis is very personal. We all have individual fears and doubts. Personally, I fear that one day I won't be able to have a family because it may not even be ethical to bring a life into a dying planet. And that is very scary for me to admit, but it's true emotions that I'm feeling. And I think it's important that whatever you have to express, just to start expressing it, because you'll be adding to the collective voice and value of this movement. My generation did not create this crisis, but we are the last that has the chance to mitigate the effects. Thank you so much to everyone who helped create this space today for Gabby and I to share thoughts. Gabby, do you have any final things to say?
No, I just want to say thank you, everybody. You are all so empowering. We appreciate you all so much. Thank you so much.
I'm going to share a link in the chat. Sorry, I'm just going to share a link in the chat to Fridays for Future Toronto website. And there you can find all of our social medias. You can even sign up for a newsletter to stay up to date with all of our upcoming actions.
Thank you both. I loved your message, and I'm glad we've recorded it so we can listen again. So I'm going to actually introduce the next speaker now. We have Mark Takifman here. And Mark has worked in business development and admin for over 40 years and been an organizational development consultant in the citizen sector, which means the nonprofit sector, in Canada, the US, India, China, and Uganda for over 2 decades. He sat on community service committees and boards in Canada and the US, as well as being an active volunteer for many other organizations. And I am going to pass it on to Mark at this point. I'm excited to hear about how you've crafted your climate conversation.
Michelle and I arranged a kitchen table and we had a very interactive discussion. And after that, it took about an hour. After that, I had called him up about a week later. We communicate with each other on WhatsApp and we discussed what happened and what the parents wanted to do. And we decided that the school needed an environmental or sustainability curriculum, and we were going to create some lesson plans for the school. So we are meeting on a weekly basis to develop this. And people have been sharing lesson plans and ideas. Anne has already shared stuff with me, and I've been doing that with him. And this is an ongoing process. So when I said in my breakout group that I'd like to see something happen from this, it's already happening, and I'm very excited to say we are planning to have our first lesson plans implemented in July. So that was the first one I did. The second one I did was with this woman on the left, Tela. This is how I knew her when I first met her. In the desert in Rajasthan, it's so hot. When you're riding a scooter or a bike, you have to protect all your skin. So I had a Zoom meeting with her on the bottom right, and we talked about many things. I showed her the same PowerPoint presentation and the same videos. Her husband works for the CSR company, and so she wants to do something too, but I'm still following up with her to see what she's going to be doing. So let me go to the next one. I have to do this manually. So one of the things I was asked to talk about was, well, what were some of the cultural considerations I had to do? So the first one I told you, it's called a climate floor conversation. Second one I had to talk about was the federal government in India is not that kind to people who are advocating for climate change or anything to do with that. So they're aggressive. So I advised Vishal to keep his profile low. Also, the local area, there's a lot of pollution from fabric industry in Balotra, also to keep his profile low. So we're going to start off with just the 3 R's. There's about 150 students and the kids, and they are ages 6 to 8, a few outside of that. We also were going to make sure that the parents and the teachers were buying into the whole program because they're the ones that support what the kids do. So if we teach the kids in school and they go home and their parents are not following the same rules, what's the point? Other challenges that we talked about was the city doesn't do any recycling or any garbage in any pickup in any major way. There's no products or produce that are sustainable or organic. The community there is not used to thinking about environment or sustainability or being green. It's just a poor community in the desert trying to hold their heads above the water, if I may say that. And the climate crisis has not hit home to them, even though they are feeling effects. One of the effects they feel, and I felt when I lived there, was temperatures above 55 degrees, which I can assure you is not very comfortable. So, if we have questions later, I'd be glad to take them. You can please feel free to write me, look at my website. This is basically what I'm doing with Gyandisha School.
Thank you, Mark. That's wonderful. Great to hear about an initiative that is quite ambitious and quite rewarding. So I want to introduce next Yuen Chun Chan. And Yuen Chun Chan has been actively working in the Toronto area to bring conversations to her community. And I am so inspired by the work she's been doing. She has founded Creation Care 120, and we'll put a link in the chat about that. So Yuen Chun, I look forward to hearing you.
Okay, so let me show my face at least, though too, I don't want to show my elderly spot, but I like to show my PowerPoint. So I like to share with you my PowerPoint, but I don't need the sound. So share. Can you see my PowerPoint? You do.
Great, Yuen Chun. We see it.
Yes. Okay. Great. So I'm going to share. Oh, you okay? You are making it from the very beginning. Okay, good to go. I would like to share my journey. On 2015, after COP21, I got big support after I joined ClimateFast. I joined the action and then I learned a lot. But my question to myself is, how can I bring this message of climate crisis to my Cantonese speaking community? I have the dialect, I want to share with them. Now, let me look at my own resources. I'm a Christian, and I know quite a few church people, and then my Christian friends, and I know all these Christian active goers to go to church every week. Third, my Cantonese is my mother tongue, and I understand the culture most of them coming from. And I remember I have a master's degree in Christian studies in theology seminary in Hong Kong 40 years ago, but this can bring back their trust in me. So my challenge and opportunities are here. Challenge is there is no teaching of climate crisis in Chinese church. That's my knowing. Second, a friend who goes to Sunday school said, I don't think to protect the earth is coming from the Bible. That is not necessary an important goal being a Christian. So I asked him, can you give me an opportunity to come to your class? So he arranged it. Then 6 months later, I have an opportunity to do that. Second challenge, what does the Bible say about climate crisis? Then I start to have to study about that. Second, where can I find the Chinese materials? They're not comfortable to read the English or just transport the KTCC from ClimateFast. So I have to look for that. The third, who can support me in this process? First, I look for people. The first one I got is Samuel Chiu. I just looked around and casually talked with my friends about my passion. And then someone told me, look for this person, go and get him. When I found him, I already knew that he moved away from Toronto to Vancouver already. No problem, email. I found him and found that he had translated this book into Chinese. In Chinese, it is Jesus' Theology of Creation Care, something like that. The name is Dare to Care for God's World by Dave Bookless. Now, Samuel Chiu is now a staff in Araksha in Vancouver. I visited him and he is willing to offer me resources and advice whenever I need. Bingo. And then I continue to consult him whenever I have problem. And after I visited him in Vancouver, I brought back 30 copies of this Chinese version of this book. Second person I got is when I went to Hong Kong, I volunteered in China with other thing with my husband. And I knew that Dr. Kim Chung Ho, who had graduated in the same university as I, and he's a professor and he's an expert in North and South Arctic. So I talked to him. I know you're coming to Toronto in August. Can you come to lead a gathering for me? He said, of course I will. And then we make a poster, get a place, 50 people came together and listened to the topic, follow God's mission, take care of the creation. So after 3 hours, I asked people who would like to join me to share this mission. And then a lady sitting in front row put up her hand very, very tall. That's Patty. Patty. And then after that, we have 4 other people. That means 6 of us sitting together in my home in the kitchen table to talk about what can we do. And they are so excited. And then they make a website, make a Facebook, created a name for our group. So all 6 of us are founder of Creation Care 120. We make a website and Facebook. We have an email list now. I joined the training from KTCC from the very beginning, the whole day training. That was great, very inspiring. And then I focus on the audience, church, the Sunday school, the fellowship, because they can do all the administration, recruitment, people gather anyway there. And I don't have to touch any technology, which I know nothing. So it comes to, I can focus on my curriculum of my teaching, revised from KTCC that I learned from ClimateFast. How should I revise it? First, most important thing is I have to teach the Bible. Name is Creation Care BNA. Beef, what the Bible said. And for now, climate crisis is very serious now. And then action we can take together. And so basically I follow KTCC from ClimateFast, and with the first part I have to figure out with my group. And each session, if I go to Sunday school, I have 4 sessions, for example, and then I ask for feedback on a piece of paper. They write it without signing the name. And I have WhatsApp group with them during that 4 weeks, so we can continue to talk and chat, support one another. Who have more material, we can exchange. With the English congregation, because the Chinese congregation liked my teaching, and then the English pastor come to me, can you come as well? So the young people, there was a small group. The youngest person is 10 years old. The oldest is 35 years old. Quite a great group. They are good with technology. So I create a movie, 1.5 minutes, to share with them. And so the last session, I asked them, would you please also make one presentation, 1.5 minutes, and then share with us. And then after that, you can show it with your friend. And that was a wonderful suggestion. I give my credit to myself. You can copy this. I like that iMovie as well. Okay, so we continue the WhatsApp a little bit. So come back to who. I always feel it's very important, come back to the large group. Whatever problem, I come back and I email to people whenever I have questions. It's very important I have the larger community always come back. I'm very grateful to have this community that we can do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuen Chun. Your story is amazing. And you got lots of practical tips in there. So thank you so much. All right, so I am so excited to introduce our last speaker for this part, Tamara Lindemann. And Tamara Lindemann is a songwriter and singer who performs under the name The Weather Station. As The Weather Station, she has released 5 albums and toured extensively across Europe, US, Canada, and Australia. She has been nominated for a Juno, a SOCAN Award, and the Polaris Prize. Her most recent album, Ignorance, was praised as a masterpiece by The Guardian and received a Best New Music designation in Pitchfork. Was profiled in the New York Times, New Yorker, and Uncut magazine, among many others. And welcome, Tamara. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Very fancy. I'm embarrassed now. Yeah, so my name's Tamara. I'm a musician, and like so many of us here, I'm someone that, 2 years ago, I fell down the climate rabbit hole. I got obsessed and I felt, the climate anxiety, which gave way to climate grief, which gave way to, being that really annoying person on Facebook yelling at everyone, which gave way to showing up randomly, trying to figure out how to be useful. And ultimately I started like an event where I basically talked about climate feelings on stage with people in my community. And then that led to a sort of strange situation where I've put out an album and I've made climate reality a big part of how I talk about my album. And so I've wound up in this funny situation where I've been talking about climate change with all sorts of media outlets and strangers and people on the internet. And somehow I just wind up in this situation where I keep talking about it. So I'm not like an expert, but I can share what I feel that I've learned. And, I'll begin with my feeling that, call me a Pollyanna, but I really believe, and everything I've experienced since I started, being very publicly forward about climate change, is that I don't think there's anyone on planet Earth right now who knows about this that doesn't feel some level of grief, fear, or sadness about the climate crisis. I really think nobody wants this to happen, and there's immense emotion around this issue. However, most of us have found a way so we don't allow ourselves to feel what we really feel. And that's why, we don't see enough climate activism. We don't see, in Canada, for example, average people, our aunts and uncles, our cousins, the people we know, they're not showing up for this issue in the way that I feel that they should. And what I find is that most people have sort of constructed a fence around the place in their heart where they care about this particular issue. And for a lot of us in the global north, people who, like me, who are wealthy and privileged and relatively safe, a lot of that fence is made up of defensiveness and also shame. 30 years of messaging about climate change being a matter of personal responsibility, I think that's really succeeded in dividing us from ourselves, from our deep care, and dividing us from each other, and inserting shame into this conversation in a way that we don't tend to feel with other collective issues like runaway capitalism. And as we all know, if any of us have ever tried to have an argument on social media, defensiveness is one of the most powerful emotions on the planet. So what I do when I walk into a climate conversation, whether it's with my mom, with a friend, with a journalist, in a public setting, is what I do is I bring into it in my heart my real belief that the other person who I'm talking to cares about this every bit as much as I do. They just don't know how to acknowledge it, and they haven't brought that into their visible heart. And the other thing that I bring into the conversation is just a knowledge in myself that when you talk about climate change to people, you are probably going to bump up against really negative, charged, heavy personal emotions. You know, you might run into someone's defensive,ness or shame. You'll see something go across their eyes, and then suddenly they want to tell you about how they like don't always take a vacation. You know, like they want to tell you about their shame feelings. And I think that's something that we haven't really quite understood as a movement, is that this is very heavy. You know, I feel like walking into a public space and talking about climate change can feel like walking into a party and talking about death. You know, a lot of people clam up and they get tense and they don't know how to feel. So I think that that's something that's really guided me. And as I say, this belief that other people care about this as much as I do. They just don't know how to move forward, or they don't know what to do, and they don't think they're allowed to show up. They don't think that they're allowed to feel what they feel. And so I just think of it as like, I'm taking down fences. I'm not trying to teach. I'm not trying to inform. I'm trying to take down a fence and allow the person to come to me. So one thing that I've found really useful is when I'm talking about this, I use the word I. I never use the word you. I use the word I. And I tell my story. I talk about how I feel. And I find that allows people to come to me. So not unlike Gabby and Megan, who told their story in such a wonderful, vulnerable way, where they shared their uncertainty, they shared their shame, they shared their frustration, they shared their difficulty. I felt immediately an immense sense of empathy and care for them, and I wanted to show up for them, and I wanted to help them out. And I literally went to the Fridays for Future website on the Zoom, and I signed up. So I guess what I wanted to express, I'm out of time, was I think of it as not unlike songwriting. You know, when you write a song that is honest and truthful and real and vulnerable, you allow people to come to you. And when you don't tell people how to feel, it often allows them to feel their own feelings, and then they can show up. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Well, so much to think about, and really touching as well, like moving. That's wonderful. Yeah. Okay, so that's next. We thought we might actually just talk a little bit in the second half here about how you might move your group into doing something and help them support each other. So we are going to move into screen sharing a little bit, and some of the facilitators are just going to share some ideas. And you don't have to feel like you have to practice any or all of these for sure, but we'd like to leave you with some options for collective courage and for people taking action together. So I'm going to start. I'm going to try screen sharing for everyone. So let's hope that I'm able to do that. Okay, so explain this section is about the very last part of the KTCC, which can be the most important, so that you leave people feeling supported. And just to tell you what we're covering here, we're going to talk about a potential 6 points for civic engagement that you could leave people with. And some people mentioned these in my breakout already, some of them. We're going to talk about the what's next section of the KTCC and how to leave someone with a motivating, hopeful story, different types of action you could offer them to do next, and talk a little bit about political advocacy. And so I'm going to these are the civic engagement points, and briefly, they're keep talking, sign petitions, demonstrate, participate, join a local group, support a local movement like the Just Recovery movement, participate in public comment sessions, or write letters and op-eds. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Lynn to talking about it.
Thank you, Colleen. So here are just some general principles. You want to start with questions. You want to make space for feelings. Tamara was expressing that so very well. You want to give space for stories, personal stories being the most engaging in terms of engaging the whole person and emotions and so forth. You need to want to be able to explain the emergency. And what you want ideally is that people leaving your conversation, whether you do one session or two or more, they feel that they're then empowered to be able to do this, that you're able to give them the opportunity to understand to the point in which they are then able to share this with others. So it's a fairly high bar to get to in one conversation. So we're certainly not setting a standard that you have to. These are just things that we'd like to go forth with. So we want to be able to highlight intersectionality and justice issues because those are intimately connected to having a livable future and a community that we're all together in going forward. I think you've probably heard the expression that we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. So we need to be aware of how people are being affected. Emissions from Canada are greatly affecting the rest of the world, and we need to understand that. And of course, climate policies in Canada are greatly affecting Indigenous communities. So understanding those things to the extent that you can in the conversational context that we're moving forward with is very helpful for broader understanding. So solutions, really important that people feel there are answers, because you don't want people walking away feeling powerless from the conversations we engage in. They've got to be empowering, and that has got to involve solutions. And showing many of the benefits that can occur because of the necessary changes. So for example, jobs and employment for children and young people, for marginalized communities, building things that are needed in communities and putting our resources into that. So there's a reference there of Catherine Hayhoe. Her YouTube series is great for, they're all really short, but they teach you about how to have these kinds of elevator conversations, just short conversations that engage people. So I think there's another page, right? And I will also drop in the chat the link for a Green Pack project called Everyday Advocates. They're encouraging people to organize town halls the week of May 17th, or at any point, town halls with the elected representatives in your area at all 3 levels. So if you sign up at Everyday Advocates, they'll invite you to be part of a planning community in your riding. So being able to participate is very important. Staying informed, you can be a source for people of some of these alternative news. So it's not always in the mainstream news that we get what we need to know, although CBC does have What on Earth, which is now a weekly show about climate. But these are other very important sources, the energy mix, the narwhal, and you know, I won't read them all, but you can see, and those resources are on our website. So staying tuned to call outs for action, because we have to do these actions together. And if people who lead your climate conversation can stay connected, and then they can actually become involved and help, find a role to help. And there's many different roles for helping, from writing letters, to showing up to provide support, for making phone calls, like there's just all different kinds, making banners, there's the creative process, there's music like Tamara's doing, lots of different roles. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, I think this is my slide. It's Anne here. So another way to practice citizen engagement is join a group. And I think I may have mentioned this anecdote before of a film director when asked, what are 3 things you can do about the climate crisis? And his response was, there are 3 things, and they are join a group, join a group, join a group. So why join a group? Individual actions count, of course, but individual actions as a part of a collective count so much more. Joining a group is key if we are going to mobilize a climate justice movement that cannot be ignored. Individuals join groups, groups enter into coalitions with other groups, Together, we are becoming an ever more powerful political force. On a personal level, you will learn from those who have been involved in climate justice action for years. You will learn from their collective institutional knowledge about how to put together campaigns, how to talk to politicians, how to write letters, how to do all that important political stuff. And they will also learn from you and the skills and insights that you bring to the group. So it's a mutually enriching process. And lastly, you will make friends and build community. And I think I'm going to argue that that simple act of joining a group in and of itself is a climate action. For strengthening community is necessary to building resilience, and we need that in our efforts to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis. Here are some of the groups highlighted here: ClimateFast, Climate Justice Toronto, For Our Kids is a group that I'm involved, which brings together parents. Fridays for Future, of course, and Idle No More, the Indigenous movement. Seniors for Climate Action Now are becoming very active, and Toronto 350, which is part of the broader 350.org climate movement. And if you can go to the resources that we'll be providing for an even longer list of climate justice organizations that you might be interested in joining. And I think I have one more slide. Supporting intersectional initiatives. This is really important when thinking about the climate crisis. It stems from a recognition that the climate crisis has its roots in extractive colonialism of the fossil fuel industries, the elevation of profit over and against human well-being, and that both of these are rooted in the history of colonialism, racism, and white supremacy. As Hopkins from the Sierra Club wrote last year, you can't have climate change without sacrifice zones, you can't have sacrifice zones without disposable people, and you can't have disposable people without racism. So against this, as Leah Thompson writes here, we need intersectional environmentalism. Intersectional environmentalism is an inclusive version of environmentalism that advocates for both the protection of people and the planet and does not minimize or silence social inequality. The adoption of an intersectional approach involves recognizing that standing alongside Black, Indigenous people and people of color is integral to confronting the climate crisis. It's not an add-on, it's integral. An intersectional approach involves recognizing that the impacts of the climate crisis, like COVID, are falling disproportionately on racialized and low-income communities, the very people who have contributed the least to the problem. An intersectional approach involves following the leadership of BIPOC people who are on the front lines of the climate crisis and on the front lines in the struggle against the fossil fuel industries. And an intersectional approach requires looking to the ways in which climate solutions can advance social equity by upholding Indigenous rights and providing good jobs, affordable housing, clean air, clean water. In other words, putting the health of the people and the planet first and ensuring that no one is left behind. Thank you. And now I'll pass to Val.
Hi, so I'm speaking about some of the things that your group could decide to do, or people from your group could decide to do. And these are lists of where people can consult with the various levels of government. And just, you know, here's an example. If we come to the environmental registry for the Ontario government, why you could get right busy because they're applying for permission to increase the cost for hydrocarbon pipelines from 2 million to 10 million. And that one has to do by April 29th. So, you know, your group with a little bit of research can focus on something like that to depute or in writing to the government. So I'm going to go to the next slide just because you know, we're a little short of time. I'm going to move along. I wanted to tell you about something that ClimateFast has begun. Myself and Lorna, who's on this call, have started a letter writing bee, and we're finding a lot of interest in that. And so what we do is we find, an issue, perhaps from those pages just that were on the last slide, or perhaps from the news and so on. And every second Friday at noon, we get together. We have a wonderful young person who's very good at preparing a one-pager and a summary or sort of a template. And really, we're finding that people are keen to write letters, that rather than just pressing a button online with sort of a letter that everybody has written. So personalizing it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. And additionally, so anyways, if anybody wants to join our letter writing bee, if you do a kitchen table climate conversation and people want to join it, we'll provide the link in the chat for how to go about that. And then there's letters to the editor, for example. Apparently politicians, or at least their staff, pay a lot of attention to letters to the editor. And so there's some bullet points here for how you might go about writing that. It's been called the haiku of advocacy because it has to be short and sweet. A good example of a letter to the editor was that done by my sister Marion, who is also on the call tonight, and she wrote the Globe, calling them out, so calling out the editorial staff of the Globe for not including any climate experts or scientists to their economic growth conference. It's called People and Prosperity, Planning for Canadian Growth, and it doesn't have any climate experts or scientists on it. And it was a punchy letter to the editor that didn't sadly get published, but still, it was a great one. You could also try an op-ed. That takes a little more time and possibly even less likely to get printed, but if it were to, it would be great. And I noticed just the other day reading my local Village Post that, some like local papers are also a great place to get your word in. So those are some ideas that you could take away to your group. Thanks.
Okay, so we just have a couple more, and then I think we're actually going to maybe go right to the speakers and then see what time we have left to regroup and have a Q&A at the end. So I just want to talk a little bit about the different types of action your group, you can introduce your group to. And of course, you can start with individual, but I like what Diane Sachs has said about individual action. Once you calculate your footprint and once you know what you can do, that is a great place to start. But a terrible place to stop. And her point is that you then need to join some collective action, add your voice to a bigger set of actions demanding change. And that could be nonviolent direct action, like attending a demonstration. It could be working with others in your community to advocate for something that you need to change on a political level. And that leads right into the political level, where you can choose an issue that you want to contact your elected officials about and say where you want to see change. And it's been suggested that you could work as a team, find somebody else in your riding so you feel more comfortable going to visit your MP or calling them up. And or you can actually see it as a development of a relationship over time, and start writing your politicians. But I'm going to switch to the next slide, because in our kit, we have some ideas for things you could ask for. So depending on your group, they may have a specific interest that you can hook into, and you can identify with and help people decide how they would bring that interest forward and into demanding the change that they need to see. So you could be, your group is interested in demanding a shift away from fossil fuels, like an end to fossil fuel subsidies. So you could write letters together or go visit your politician together. You could have one of the latest reports. You could just say your citizens really, really care We really care that this happens and we know it must. So with your group, you can explore an idea that seems to resonate with them and how they might go forward advocating for that idea. And you see a few of them here. We have them in our kit, and we have whole pages of backup resources for you to understand what you could ask for and help your group understand. In one group, just, I know we're short of time. So in one group that I was in, it was a rural area. And in that area, I'm going to stop sharing and just share this, and then we'll go on. They were really, really good at stewardship of the land and stewardship of the trees. So they were going to form a little group and advocate to their local politicians for protecting the green belt and things like that together. So that's kind of an example of getting where your group is and helping them move forward from the thought of individual action into collective action, and asking for the bigger changes we need to see. So on that note, I'm actually going to ask the speakers, not to put you on the spot, Lela, but we're going to go right into the speakers. And then at the end, we're going to have an open Q&A with everyone. I think that might work better for the rest of our session. So Lela Bloomer has been an organizer with the For Our Kids Network since November 2019, and is constantly inspired by the energy, creativity, and drive of the network team and members. Now, her passion is finding ways around roadblocks and questioning how things have always been done. And Lela has worked and volunteered in the not-for-profit sector for more than 30 years as a writer, project manager, board member, and ardent advocate for education, healthcare, and climate action. She has a lifelong commitment to food literacy and food security, and serves on her local food policy council. With that, I want to turn it over to Lela.
Thanks so much, Colleen, and I'll be as quick as I possibly can, because I'm really interested in hearing the rest of the speakers as well. So I'm really happy to be part of this discussion and have the chance to share with you some positive stories about how individuals acting collectively can make an impact on decision makers. There's like so much in the discussion tonight that I'd like to comment on, but I will really try to stay on subject here. So as Colleen said, I'm an organizer with For Our Kids, which is a network of community groups made up of people just like you, who are concerned and passionate and motivated to change the path of environmental destruction that we find ourselves on. There are right now 23 For Our Kids groups across the country, and just about 3,000 members on the For Our Kids network. So in previous sessions, you heard about inviting others into conversation, whether they're part of your home life or work life or wider community. And I'm here to tell you that, guess what? Politicians are people too. They are people who at some point in their lives decided they wanted to serve in public office. And many of them will tell you that they did that because they wanted to make things better. They're people who have the authority and the responsibility to make decisions that directly impact every aspect of the lives of their constituents. And for that reason, they count on the voices of their constituents to guide them in that decision making. So we can easily be cynical about the democratic system that we live in, whether it's the first past the post system or the party politics or the voting age of 18. But it is a fundamental tenet of democracy that all of us as citizens not only have a right to be heard by our elected officials, but we actually have a responsibility to speak. That's not always easy for a few reasons, and most often the reasons are I don't have time or I don't know how. So I'm going to tell you how acting collectively addresses both of those issues. So for context, the local groups that I support as an organizer are predominantly led by mothers with young kids. This is a demographic that is super busy. So they're trying to squeeze in climate action between kids' schedules, work schedules, laundry, meals, and now homeschooling for a lot of them, and the list goes on. And yet they've managed over the past few months to meet with MPs about Bill C-12, to get mentioned during the House of Commons debate on the bill, and to make it into Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson's tweets. How in the world did they do this? Well, they did it by acting together. So by sharing their feelings of being overwhelmed by the enormity of the problem they were trying to solve, by finding support in the fact that others felt the same way they did, and then looking at how this like big problem can be broken down into smaller steps and then tackling those steps one at a time. I mean, there's very few people who have time to look at legislation like Bill C-12, figure out what it means, figure out what its impact will be, follow the bill through the House of Commons, write letters and emails, phone their MP's office, post about it, tweet about it, and put a video on Instagram. Like, that is a full-time job in itself. But there are trusted and experienced environmental organizations already out there. You've mentioned some of them already tonight, but there's Eco-Justice, there's Climate Action Network, Environmental Defense, many, many more who do a lot of research like that themselves. So you don't have to take that on. What I really want to get across is that the most important role you can play is to tell your elected official why you're concerned about an issue, how it impacts you and your family, and what you want them to do about it. And then this is the one way in which the world of social media can be used for good. You tell others what you did and encourage them to do the same. So that builds the momentum, builds a wave of action. So if you're a young person like the amazing young people we heard tonight, share what it means to you. If you're an overwhelmed parent who's like up all night worrying about what your kids are going to face, share what it means to you. If you're older like me and you're realizing that you have to unlearn everything you learned for the first 30 or 40 years of your life, you give them hell. You share what it means for you. So there's been a lot said tonight about being honest and open in sharing your feelings during a climate conversation. And I'd say the same holds true when you're talking to a politician. You do want to reach out and you want to connect with them as a human being. But I also want to caution you that it isn't exactly the same as having a kitchen table climate conversation. You're only meeting them for a short space in time, and you do want to maintain your own space for your own protection. So balance your facts and knowledge with emotion. All right, that's one very important thing to keep in mind. I want to keep this really short, so I'm going to kind of skip a few things, but I do really want to make one point, and that is that at For Our Kids, we talk about three things: finding some friends, taking something on, and telling the story. Finding some friends is the first step because it's the most important, but that doesn't mean that you only find people that you know or who are part of your circle. You need to seek out diverse voices, and you need to amplify what they're saying, particularly when you present to elected officials. It's very easy to be written off as a special interest group, and how you counteract that is to represent the voices that are out there for environmental justice, social justice, and racial justice, because each of those will impact the other. And Anne mentioned that a little bit earlier. So the work that For Our Kids groups are doing on Bill C-12 is amazing, and they're doing it because they're acting together. They came together over Christmas holidays and started planning strategy, and they just, as I said, broke it down step by step, took on the steps, shared what they were learning along the way, and just kept touching base with each other and making sure that that campaign grew in strength, and it's been amazing. We have a lot of other stories that For Our Kids groups are doing, and so I'm going to share in chat. I'll share a link to the webpage where you'll find lots more stories, including about the virtual town halls that were planned and hosted last year. They had representatives from every level of government in their communities. There's also stories about actions taken at a municipal level, including getting Ottawa City Council to change its mind about clawing back funding from the Emergency Climate Action Plan, big win. And two moms in Niagara who reached out into their community, and they were able to convince the Conservation Authority that the chair needed to resign because guess what? He was a climate denier. So lots of things that they could take on in their community by just working together, reaching out, collaborating with other groups, and breaking it down step by step. I'm also going to share in the chat the link to a video that it showcases two For Our Kids parents, one of whom you may recognize because it's Anne Keary and Natalie Kane from the For Our Kids Montreal team. And they're talking about why it's so important for parents to talk to their MPs. Really super video, captures everything I've tried to say here, but much more eloquently and not as rushed. So thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's time. Thanks so much.
Amazing, thank you. So many good tips. And again, I'm so glad we can watch this again so that I can take more of it in. So we have one more pair of speakers. They're going to speak together, and they represent our partner organization, Africa Climate Action Initiative and Community for Climate Action North Etobicoke. Tandeep is a volunteer communications coordinator for Akai and has the pleasure to work with people who are conscious about the environment and climate. And the role has given her the opportunity to voice her passion and advocate for the protection of climate and a sustainable future. She holds an MA in International Relations from the University of Sheffield, England, and a PG in International Development from Humber College. And in the past, she has worked in the development sector in India, England, and France, overlooking projects in primary education, women empowerment, and capacity building. And right now, she's working as a coordinator in emergency management with the Canadian Red Cross. And Hannah is a Climate Action Africa Initiative volunteer supporting many of its ongoing projects, including the Community for Climate Action Initiative North Etobicoke, and also the partner organization, PAC, Policy. Now, maybe Hannah, you can explain what PAC is. She's currently in her 4th year at Humber College studying Bachelor of International Development, and her aspirations in international development are climate justice, education, intersectional theory, and global affairs. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for that introduction and also for having us. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it's great.
Okay. So I just wanted to talk about, me and Hannah actually wanted to talk about climate action as a collective effort, and we would like to just give an overview of our community project that has been launched in January 2021. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit of certain facts that I actually came across the other day. So when we talk about 2020, I know what a year it has been. So the COVID-19 pandemic is not the only long-term crisis the world will remember for 2020. In 2020, the Northern Hemisphere experienced its hottest year on record, surpassing the 20th century average by 2.3 degrees. The global tropical cyclones in 2020 tied a record. Oceans were exceptionally warm. And in December 2020, average temperature across global land and ocean surfaces was 1.40 degrees Fahrenheit, above the 20th century average. What's interesting is nature is an untapped solution. So for tropical forests are incredibly effective at storing carbon, providing at least a third of the mitigation action needed to prevent the worst climate change scenarios. Yet, nature-based solutions receive only 3% of all climate funding. Now, this is very interesting, at least I found it very interesting. When we talk about fighting climate change, it actually improves livelihoods naturally. Community-led not-for-profits working to fight climate change are very underfunded. Natural climate solutions such as restoring degraded forests could create as many as 39 jobs per $1 million spent. That's a job creation rate more than 6 times higher than the oil and gas industry. Okay, so now I would like the opportunity to just introduce our organization, the organization we volunteer for, Africa Climate Action Initiative, or as we call it, ACAI. ACAI actually works alongside African communities on the front lines of climate change to adapt, mitigate, and build resilience. Our mission is to enhance the climate mitigation and adaptation response of African nations and their communities while building solidarity between Canadian and African communities tackling climate change. We believe Africa has the resources it needs to confront these challenges and lead the way towards a healthy and regenerative future. ACAI works with the partners to support the advancement of the initiatives underway across the continent. As you can see on the slide, these are the various partners that ACAI works with, such as Child Fund Kenya, the Rainmaker Enterprise, PAC Policy, Nelosha International, and many more. We also believe that climate action is a collective action, and thus we launched a first community initiative in Canada that was launched back in January 2021, which is called Community for Climate Action North Etobicoke. So I'm going to pass it over to Hannah to give you a bit of overview of this project.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction, Tandeep and Colleen. So I'll be talking to you about Community Climate Action North Etobicoke. So much like Africa Climate Action Initiative, we started to reflect on our own role in mobilizing the climate action, education, and initiatives in our North Etobicoke project. So we launched this project maybe over a year ago. And we believe that collective effort can't be undertaken without understanding individual capacity and individual education and awareness. And so in order to have a collective awareness over that, we have to also reflect on ourselves. So a lot of our climate action or Etobicoke projects kind of focus on individual aspects of things as well as collective initiatives. So a few of those would be food waste management, energy savings, climate education, as well as carbon footprint, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So a lot of our initiatives are funded by City of Toronto. We do partner with Humber College, Better Homes TO, Rexdale Women's Center, ClimateFast, and Cycle Toronto to run a lot of our workshops and initiatives. And we do our own individual projects, outreaches, and initiatives as well. Yeah. All right, so I'll be kind of running you through what we do specifically for each of our individual projects, and then Tandeep can take over. So waste management and food security. Globally, around 1/3 of food produced is lost or waste along the food chain from production to consumption. So that's quite a considerable amount. And I know that everyone has a specific best intention when it comes to food waste and food management. And one of the examples that I want to provide with this today is our North Etobicoke outreach that we do every 2 weeks. We've done 2 outreaches in the last 2 months, and it's concerning a North Etobicoke Kipling Avenue 2 apartment resident buildings. And we have been working with them in terms of making sure that their food compost goes towards a specific area, and their food compost, once it's collected, will be discarded to the community garden. And so kind of walking people through this education, why their action is important, kind of initiating that conversation has been a little bit, we did see a bit of pushback. We did see a bit of hesitance for people to be involved, but it is a much needed conversation that needs to be had. So it's a slow progress, but we are trying to get them to understand exactly how this effort would be beneficial for the entire community and its own. And we're hoping that it would be a starting point for them to build a collective effort and community amongst themselves so that they can have a support group as well. So that's one of the areas that we focus on for waste management and food security. For energy efficiency and savings, we do have a running workshop and several different resources that are provided by Better Homes TO. And we know that energy savings is not just turning off the lights and plugging off our computers when we're done using them. It's a lot more complex. And energy savings and efficiency, generally people are a little bit unaware of where to go besides their own individual needs. So Better Homes TO gives us a good understanding of what kind of sanctions and manuals that City of Toronto provides, and so on and so forth. So we do have workshops by them too. And pass it on to Tandeep.
Thank you, Hannah. So now I just want to talk about climate change knowledge as well, which is very important. So when we talk about collective action, there's so many ways you can actually turn your individual action into a collective action. Like you see on the screen, it says 92% of the Torontarians agree that climate change threatens personal health and well-being, yet nearly half of them do not know what they can do to address it. So there's so many ways, such as you can keep yourself informed, share knowledge, and discuss climate issues with your friends and coworkers, like we're doing right now. Then look up environmental policies and vote with climate in mind, which is very important. Talk about climate change if you get polled or surveyed. Go to talks and debates locally and ask the speaker a question about climate changes related to their field. You can sign petitions and email your local representative about an issue you care about. You can contact politicians and business leaders on social media about an issue you care about and they can do something about. Go to a protest, it makes a bigger impact because it takes more effort than a click. Definitely volunteer for an NGO, charity, or local community group. Ideally try and drag your friends along too. You can always campaign for your university or workplace to make a specific change, like switching to renewable energy or recycling. For this specific part of our project, we have actually partnered with ClimateFast. We have partnered with Transform Toronto and Humber College to actually initiate a dialogue within the community. Secondly, I would also like to talk about active transportation. So why ride a bike in Toronto? First of all, because it's healthy, it's convenient, it's cost effective and fun. You can combine cycling and transit while planning your route. Compared to a car, a bus emits 162 less grams of carbon dioxide for the same route. Contrary to normal perception, cycling is not a fitness activity that is solely involved the legs. Cycling builds strength in a holistic manner since every part of the body is involved in cycling. Plus, it is good for the climate as it reduces your carbon footprint. And for this initiative, we have partnered with Cycle Toronto in hosting training sessions in cycling. You can also learn how you can advocate for a safe and vibrant cycling city for all. And I just wanted to thank you all for being patient with us and listening to. And if you have any questions, you can always contact us. And if you want to join any of our sessions or workshops, I'm just going to copy and paste the links in the chat box as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tandeep and Hannah. So we have one more speaker, and then we're going to be at the end of our time. And I will offer the opportunity for you to stay if you'd like to ask any more questions, but you are not obliged to stay. But I would love for you to stay and listen to Matt. And Matt is the co-founder of Climate Pledge Collective and is on leave from a PhD in urban planning. He's a dad and has volunteered with many different climate action groups in Toronto. And I can attest to that because I've worked with Matt on many different initiatives. So Matt, take it away.
Hi, I'm Matt. I'm from Climate Pledge Collective, and I only have one slide, which I think Ray is going to put on the screen, but it's like a really, really good slide, okay? So don't worry that there's only one. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I guess, what Climate Pledge Collective is and what we've learned from it. It's a tiny group that my wife and I started. And basically, we got a free WordPress website, and we declared ourselves to be a group. But what we learned are sort of these two things under the logo there, better, faster, cheaper, and too small to fail, are kind of both our strategies and our slogans. Better, faster, cheaper comes from urban planning theory, and it's the idea of just sort of trying things out. An example would be when they just put like really cheap plastic chairs in Times Square for a weekend to see how it would work as a pedestrian plaza. Because if you can imagine, like actually redesigning Times Square is like $1 billion project, but they were able to do it in a weekend with just plastic chairs under the idea that they're just trying it out and learning from the project. And much later, they did do a big redesign of Times Square that made a lot more pedestrian space. And then the idea of too small to fail is something that started actually just as a joke between my wife and I, but really it makes a lot of sense that we try to be ambitious, but we also try to plan our projects for failure so that even if it doesn't get really huge, it's still a success in its own way. So I'm going to talk about a couple projects we've done and connect them to those two ideas. So the first thing we started out with was an online pledge. I guess I'll tell you how I got to that, but it came from, as a lot of us have said in this meeting, my own anxiety. I was like super anxious about climate change. I'd gone as far as I could with reducing my personal footprint, and it was obvious that it wasn't enough. So I thought, like, what can I do? Like at this point, my energy is better served by getting other people to do the low-hanging fruit, the easy things in their footprints. So we set up a pledge that has like a lot of options. We made it very open-ended so that people you don't have to be vegan, you don't have to give up flying, but you have to look at all the options and see which ones work for you. but we also did it sort of in a very cheap way. I mean, I thought about it a lot. I made a good list. I worked with a friend who's a decarbonization engineer to make sure that it made sense. But then we just used Google Forms and put it up on instead of hiring a developer. And then that's the better, faster, cheaper at work. And then another thing we did was we wanted to get out of sort of the bubble of people who are already climate activists, as many of you are doing with the Climate Kitchen conversations, and reach the general public. So we started running climate picnics. And these ones, in a way, like we promoted them a lot and we put little flyers in mailboxes in the neighborhoods and we had volunteers help us with that. But they were also, in a way, like too small to fail because we knew that the worst case scenario is that we're in a park with some musicians and we have a big sign that says climate picnic and we have a nice time in the park, even if no one comes. And we have this big sign up and a lot of people will see and think about climate change, even just for a few seconds. So that's in sort of what I'm talking about in terms of like thinking of your projects as too small to fail. And then another thing we did was we thought, oh, it would be amazing to have ads on the subway with climate facts. And like that was a big ambitious project for us because we were just getting started. So we thought, oh, like how can we plan this for failure? So when we set up the crowdfunding site, we'd done the research and we found out how much it costs to get subway ads on, which was like almost $10,000. But we said, like, if we don't raise that much money, we're gonna give whatever money we raise to the Unistoten Legal Defense Fund and to Eco-Justice, so that even if like this is kind of a bust and we raise $70 or $18 or something, at least we're making a donation to good organizations. And in the end, we did raise the money and we had a little bit of surplus, which we gave, like that was above the amount that we needed for the subway ads, which we gave to Unistoten and Eco-Justice. So that's what I mean in terms of like thinking of yourselves as too small to fail and thinking of planning your projects in a way that even if it doesn't become the huge thing that you want it to be, the huge thing you feel like has to happen for climate change because it's such a big problem, like all the levels of success are a success in this project. And that's something I really took away from the IPCC report, where they said that all aspects of society, all social sectors have to be completely transformed within the next 20 or 30 years. So if everything has to change, like if what we eat has to change, if transportation has to change, you're not going to change all of it, right? So you can start anywhere if everything has to change. So any kind of project, anything that you're doing like that is going to be a success. You just have to kind of trust that other people are working on other areas of the problem. You pick something that seems important to you and you try to get a success in that area. And then you know that other people, like there's all these different activist groups in this meeting and they're all working at this from different angles. So you just let it, it's okay that you're not doing everything. Pick one area and get started. And then the last campaign I wanted to talk about, so when the pandemic struck, we couldn't really do climate picnics anymore because you're not allowed to like go outside or that kind of thing. So we started looking around for what was an important issue, and we started our bank switch campaign. So maybe a lot of people in this group already know this because this is people who are sort of more informed than average on climate, but the Canadian banks have pumped over $600 billion into fossil fuel expansion and infrastructure since the Paris Agreement was signed. So we've got a campaign where we're signing people up to switch their bank. We try to make it in a general sort of an easy way to do it. We say, contact your branch manager first, let them know you're concerned. That's an easy first step. And then if after 6 months or a year, an amount of time that's good for you, you still aren't happy with the bank's fossil fuel policies, then you transfer your money. So yeah, on our website, Ray's got it in the chat. You can learn about the bank switch campaign, and I hope you can sign up and contact your branch managers. And yeah, there's other projects and tools on our website, so check it out, and we're happy to give you pointers or help you with information. Thanks a lot. This is really inspiring just to see so many people reaching out to different groups in different angles, because I really think that's what we have to do. Is there's so many people we have to talk to and so many projects and so many problems. So you know, just start where you are and grow that network of people who are talking about climate change a little bit larger. So thank you, everybody. Very glad to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. So many good initiatives and tips. And so we actually are at the end of our time, and you'll see in the chat, the chat monitor, Pedro, has been really busy putting lots of links. So there's a survey link, and there's information links, and there's a donor link, and you're welcome to explore those. We will be following up as well with an email. And in that email, there'd be a link to a doc that we're going to populate with resources over the next couple of weeks, and the video when it's available. So you could return to it. So look for that, and don't worry about catching all of the links in the chat because there's a lot of them. But there is a survey that would be great if you took a moment to fill out so that we could know what we did well, what we could do better. We're all learning together. And yeah, so if you want to hold on, if you have a question, you're welcome to. But if not, I want to thank you. This is the end of our 4 webcasts, but this is the beginning of the conversation. And I loved everything everyone shared in the breakout with me and the speakers. I think we have so many things to go on. And yeah, so certainly reach out for support if you need it in any way. And you've got all the information in the chat, thanks to Pedro. So yeah, does anyone have anything they'd like to speak up about at this point? We'll stay on for another 5, maybe 10 minutes at most. Yeah, Lynn?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knows how much work Colleen has done on this, and she deserves our thanks. Your leadership has been so outstanding, and we have a fabulous team, but we could not be there and here with all of you without Colleen. So please, I just want everyone to know how much we appreciate her, and I know you do as well. Thank you, and I hope people will stay on. Thank you.
Aw, Lynn, thank you. And I mean, it is a team, and you know, everyone's put so much in so many different ways. So I would like to just now, there's a lot of people on the call still. So if you want to talk, maybe an S in the chat is the best way, but if you wave and I see you, I can actually answer you that way too. But if not, I'll give you a few seconds. But if nobody speaks up, then maybe this is time for us to say goodnight. So,
Colleen, I was to remind you about telling people about the support group.
Oh, yes. So the next thing we are planning is a monthly support meeting number 1. It's going to be on Sunday, May 2nd and at 3 p.m. So email us at ktcc.climatefast.ca. You can just return the message you get, the follow-up message, with a note that you'd like to come to that support meeting if you'd like. And Lynn has offered to delve a little more deeply into maybe conflict management in groups for us as part of that session. And Lynn,
yes, it's simply challenges that you might have in facilitation if you have concerns. My background is as a facilitator and in conflict resolution. I don't expect you're going to have anything you can't handle happen, but there's just a few tips about that might make it easier for you if something takes you by surprise, or if you feel defensive or reactive to something. So that we'll cover a little bit of that, but it's mainly about support for you. How are you doing in setting up a conversation? What questions are you having as you go about doing it? In order for this program to work, we need it to spread. So we need to give you that support, be there with you, whatever you need to help you reach out to the people that you would like to reach out to. And we're just going to build a huge, strong movement together. And I just wanted to add that I think what came up in our initial, sorry, I lost my video here, in our initial group was about a mixed group. So working with different people in the groups you set up, how you would manage that. So that kind of question we could delve more into as well when we have the support conversation. So do sign up if you can. And if you can't, correspond with us and we'll be happy to give you a phone call or answer whatever questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, so I don't see anybody have an S in the chat or their hand up at this point, so I'm going to say good night and thank you again so much. everyone.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.
Especially Colleen. Thank you.
No, and thank you.
Thanks.